I gave people all the stuff they really needed. Social Security checks, utility bills, TV guide.
I want a TV guidance counselor. TV guidance counselor. Staying up to watch all night, and everything's gonna be alright with my TV guidance counselor.
Hello, everybody. It's here. It's finally here. The TV Guidance Counselor 10th Anniversary Special. I can finally shut up about it. I've been talking about it for, it seems like, at least 9 years. But this is the week, this is the day, as the said. 10 years ago, 2014, I came up with my first episode of this show, and I was really racking my brain. What should I do to celebrate 10 years, which is kind of an insane accomplishment, if I can just pat myself on the back a little bit here. I always think of sort of high school and college as these sort of transformative times in your life. And I went to high school for 4 years and college for 5. I went to Northeastern. I'm not stupid. It's a 5-year school. So I've actually done this a year longer than those two things, which is kind of appropriate, but seems kind of insane. So I thought, rather than trying to get a massive guest, and I could totally, you guys could be listening to me interview Keanu Reeves and George Clooney right now together, and Sandra Bullock. But instead, I thought I'd do my sort of year in review that I've been doing the last 4 or 5 years, but for 2014. I thought that might be fun and give you kind of a history and prehistory of the show. So that's what you're in for the next, 90 minutes, however long I talk, just me. So, sorry to disappoint you. I think everybody's already probably switched off whatever they were playing this on. But for those of you sticking around, I think you'll enjoy some of this stuff. It's a lot of the questions people have asked about the show, and this is kind of a full history of the last 10 years. So one piece is, normally when I do these histories, I use my Google Calendar, and it doesn't go back 10 years. So what I've done is sort of, I have my Google Photos from 2014 and the episodes themselves. So I think that will help go through. And I never go back and look at episodes or listen to episodes, let alone stuff from 10 years ago. And I sort of dipped in and out of some of these as I was looking, and that was pretty amazing. So let's start with a little prehistory. This is relevant to the show, but me, Ken Reed, the host, the person you've been listening to, and some of you have been there since the beginning or have come in midway through and gone back and listened to all the episodes. I think this is episode number 660 or something like that. I know the numbering is different, but that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time. That's, I don't even know the numbers on that, but that's like months of listening. So thank you. But I started doing stand-up. I did it a couple times in 2001, but really 2003, when I lived in England for a really extended period of time. And I say I started in England, which I did, but when I think about it, I probably did stand up like 10 or 12 times, which really in hindsight isn't that many, over the course of like a year, or 10 months. But that is where I started. I was very lucky in that I got to see people like Stuart Lee and Johnny Vegas, did shows with John Oliver before he moved over to the US at some of the open mics and started there. I moved back to the US. And as unsuccessful as I am, or certainly was in the first 10 years as a stand-up, I had kind of a charmed stand-up life. I never really did open mics, which makes me a jerk. I certainly never did a bringer show. When I moved back to the U.S., I got on a couple shows from people I knew from radio or from bands. Opening for bands was not fun, but it did make me a better stand-up, I think. And I'd worked at radio from, I think, 99 to 2001, which was WFNX, which was our sort of alt-rock station, our sort of K-rock, but more indie. It was tied to our local weekly free newspaper, the Boston Phoenix, which is like, what's the New York one, like the LA Weekly, or not the New York, my God, I can't remember the New York one. But anyway, like a cool alt weekly that also has a huge adult section. Anyway, so I worked there and I knew a lot of radio people. That's where I met a lot of band people. So one thing I'm sort of setting the groundwork for is how I know so many freaking people. Don't consider myself a very social person. I'm not a mover and a shaker. I'm not, making friends and influencing people, but somehow inadvertently I accumulated a massive amount of friends and acquaintances over the years. And this is sort of pre-social media, really, from when I was in bands in high school and going to shows all the time, working at FNX. I worked at a local CBS affiliate. Then I moved to the UK. I have friends from college in the US and the UK, and just a ton of people, and it's strange. So I moved back to the US, start doing stand-up here, and after like my first show, people just start saying, hey, come do my show, and I start just getting a lot of gigs, and it goes well. I start doing a lot of shows at the Comedy Studio, which was sort of the alt room in Boston at that time, although technically in Cambridge. Started in 96, I believe, but by the late 90s, early 2000s, it started by Rick Jenkins as sort of a workout room for the Boston comics who are still here, who didn't make the mass exodus and the waves. And it was kind of taken over, a non-hostile takeover by people like Patrick Borelli and Eugene Merman and Larry Murphy and Jen Kirkman, a lot of the people you see on Bob's Burgers and that kind of stuff now. So when I started doing shows there, that crew of people had sort of just left, pretty much all moved to New York, more or less, in the early 2000s. So it was a bit of a shakeup. Tim McIntyre, who's been on this show, hosted a Thursday night show there that was their sort of alt show. It was called Thursday Night Fights. It was sort of like a dive bar panel show is what I'd call it. It was fun, and he got a decent audience there. So started doing that show. Kind of started doing the Comedy Studio like once a week and just getting out doing a lot of shows. I then get pretty lucky and I start getting on a lot of audition shows. I was on a billion audition shows for Montreal, which I never got. Comedy Central's Live at Gotham, which I never got, although for some reason Comedy Central thought that I did, which I guess says a lot for that credit. And, tons and tons and tons of those things. Very frustrating, but in hindsight, cool that I was getting those things. Eugene Merman invites me down to do, no pun there, his shows down in New York. There was a show called Invite Them Up. That was sort of the big mid-aughts alt show in New York. It used to be, I believe, Mark Maron's show before he moved to LA after Air America dissolved, and he started WTF. And it was the show where like John Mulaney, Amy Schumer, Kumail Nanjiani, Hannibal Buress, Pete Holmes, like all the people from comedy now, they were all doing this show, all the Bob's Burgers people. So I'd go down there, sometimes with the Walsh Brothers, sometimes on my own, do that show. Eugene and Michael Showalter started a show called Tearing the Veil of Maya in Brooklyn. I started doing that show pretty often. I'd take the bus down after work, sleep on the bus, go to work. Started meeting a ton of people there, people I had no business being on shows with, like very famous comics, a lot of the Flight of the Conchords people, Todd Barry, and all those sorts of people. So then I start getting opening gigs. When any of those people are coming through Boston, they have me open for them. Or if they have a friend coming through Boston who asks them, hey, you've been to Boston, who's a good person to open for me, they would recommend me. So I kind of become the go-to opener. I get really cool shows at big theaters and that sort of thing. When I lived in the UK, I also really started getting into UK comedy. Obviously, I love the Young Ones, if you know me. I love the Young Ones and loved UK comedy. But there was 25 years of alt comedy in the UK that I was sort of unaware of, that I discovered when I lived there. Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer, as I said, Johnny Vegas, Stuart Lee. And one thing that blew my mind was this guy called Dave Gorman, who, if you heard my episode with Henry Normal last month, we talked about a little bit. But I just blindly caught a show that Dave Gorman did in 2001 called Are You Dave Gorman? And I don't know when TED Talks started. I think this was before that. But it was sort of that TED Talks format. He was doing a PowerPoint. It was like a 6-part, 6.5 hours of this sort of live show. And the premise was he was looking for other people around the world named Dave Gorman. And it was part stand-up, part video, presentation. It just blew my mind. So as I started doing better in Boston, I thought, maybe I should do a show like that. I like that format with the PowerPoint. So I started doing sort of an hour show, a new hour show every year, every 2 years for about 5, 6 years, late aughts. Did one called Very Special Episode. I think it was my third show. That one was about my love of television, my obsession with television, a lot of stories, stuff about very special episodes, obviously. That did really well. I posted it online. It got a ton of views. This is sort of not the very early days of YouTube, but sort of early days of YouTube. Started getting noticed a little bit more there. Got opening gig for a summer for Bob Saget kind of via that. Again, I'm very grateful for all these things. And in 2007, Rick from the Comedy Studio asked me if I wanted to be the regular Friday night host at the studio. Friday night was always the super busy night. So from 2007 to end of 2012, I hosted every Friday night at the Comedy Studio, which was pretty great. It was, a guaranteed sellout audience. They were always really receptive. And we'd have a lot of drop-ins there of, famous people. Mike Birbiglia, You Cannot Be Named, Louis C.K. would come down a lot. Gary Gulman, so I know Gary. A lot more people. So again, meet more people there. Eugene starts doing his Eugene Merman Comedy Festival. I start getting invited to that, which was crazy and amazing. If you haven't seen the very good documentary, it started as a joke about the Eugene Merman Comedy Festival. Watch it, buy it. It's very good. I'm not interviewed in it, but my face is in it for about 24 frames, which, I always said my trajectory for fame will be, I will be a guy who will be an interviewed talking head in documentaries about other people I knew in businesses I was in, either bands or comedy or whatever, but didn't make it on that one. Not bitter about it, but it's very good. So I did almost every Eugene show in New York. He started doing them up in Boston as well, and met a ton of people there. I invited myself along with the Walsh Brothers to the Aspen Comedy Festival in 2005, 2005 or 2006, I think it was 2005. Met a ton of people there. Baron Vaughn, that's where I first met Dana Gould. Just tons of people who I am still in touch with today who've become friends. And, this is all sort of bubbling up till about 2012. 2012, I've had enough. I'm kind of like, next year I'll have been doing this 10 years. Haha, now, nothing's really happened. I had a billion auditions for this and that. What am I going to do? Did one final show called Ken Reed's Shirt Tales that I was going to kind of be like, I'll bow out on this. This will be the last one. And around that time, I'd also been fed up with hosting Friday nights at the Comedy Studio. It's really stressful. It was an hour and 45-minute show. Had to be out of the club by 10 because they turned it into a dance club. And, I'd have 10, 15 acts supposed to be doing 7 minutes each. They all kind of go over. I'm sort of babysitting and producing more or less, like having to move stuff around. I enjoyed the fact that I got a ton of material out of there because I would try to do a new at least 10 minutes every week. But I was just burnt out. I couldn't do it anymore. And, nothing was really happening. But towards the end of that year, I get invited to do some more festivals. Riot LA, I did, I think, all 6 of those. Bridgetown Comedy Festival. And I kind of get a renewed lease on life 10 years in, and I'm excited. I want to do some more stuff. So I had quit at the Comedy Studio, but my muse, my comedy muse, who will come back into this story in a bit, Sean Sullivan, sort of changed my mind there. So Thursday nights, as I mentioned, which was Tim McIntyre's Thursday Night Fights. Eventually, Tim got sick of that, became the Dan Sally Show for a couple of years. I might be messing the order up here, but then it was Mike Kaplan and Micah Sherman. Then it was Zach Sherwin for a while, and then Sean. Sean was hosting Thursday nights. Thursday nights were always pretty dead. So Rick was a little more forgiving of doing like some sketches or some alty stuff there because it was kind of a gravy night. If they made money, it was kind of extra. So Sean was kind of fed up with doing Thursdays, and he said, don't outright quit. Let's pitch to Rick that you do Thursday nights, but do whatever you want. Like it'll be an alt show. See if he goes for it, then do that. So I thought that's a good idea. Let's see if I can do that. And the previous year I had written and produced the Comedy Studio Christmas show, which was a lot of work, but was really fun. It was weird and strange. So I thought maybe I can do something with this. So what I did was a show that I called Secret Menu. And this was a weekly show in 2013 where I tried to get Rick to not book any comics. I'm going to book the comics myself, but the compromise was they had a thing called Comic in Residence, and a comic opened every show for a month. So I had them. And then I think I limited him to 2 or 3 other comics instead of 8 or 9, which was kind of cool. And I said, then I can do whatever I want with the rest of the time. So what I thought was, it's kind of cool. No one comes to the show because they know who the comics are on the show. They just go to see like generic comedy. So I thought, well, maybe I can make that a little better and have them go see, we don't know who's going to be on the show, but we want to go see this comedy show. It was kind of, my idea was it was something you had to specifically be there for to see live. And I wanted to have comics doing things that weren't necessarily stand up. So again, I'm very much loving those UK panel shows, which we never really took off here, and have that sort of model in mind. So what I did in the show is I had sort of modular segments, and I do like 3 or 4 a show and kind of swap some out and do others. But every show I'd open with a new 15 to 20 minutes every week, which in hindsight as a comic, insane to do that, but I did it. I would also do a segment called the yearbook sessions. So a comic would give me their yearbook like a week or 2 before the show. I'd go through, I'd make a bunch of notes, and then on stage, I'd interview them about their yearbook. Very TV guidance counselor, by the way. Well, who's this person? Is this person? Tons of fun. There's a few of them up online. Loved doing that. I would do a segment called the Damaged Goods Auction, where a comic would come up on stage with an item that they owned. It could be anything from a CD to a Santa suit to a gaming chair. They would tell the story of that item, usually funny. And then we would auction that item off to the audience, to the highest bidder. They would get a certificate of authenticity. That was so fun. That ended up being like a calling card of the show. And the audience had so much fun. And first of all, the shows were never paid. I don't think. Maybe Rick gave me like $25 every so often. But, comics do these things for free. But people started making like $100, $200 on this auction because the audience would sort of reward them based on how much they love the story. And people get competitive in a live setting like that when you start bidding. So it ended up, and they were happy to give the money to them. So, that was really fun. There was just bizarre, fun stories. I did a thing called TV Casualty where... again, very TV guidance counselor, where someone had seen something on TV as a kid that wasn't meant to be scary. For example, Punky Brewster episode. They would talk about their trauma, and then we would all, as a group, watch the episode together, or watch segments of the episode together to sort of exorcise that trauma. That was very fun. In every show I'd end, and some comics hated this, because comics do their set and they leave, generally, right? And I was like, I don't want people to leave. And I understand why comics do their set and leave. I do it too. I want them to feel like they'll miss out if they leave. So everyone, and I don't think anyone ever left in the year I did it, but at the end of the show, I'd bring everybody back on stage. And I called this the trailer test. And I would show them the trailer for... just a bonkers movie. I love, B movies and weird movies, Neon Maniacs or Break-In or Rap, whatever weird movie. So I'd show the trailer, and then we'd go down the line and everyone would kind of give their opinion of their trailer. Would you see this movie based on the trailer? And that's how we ended the show. I think Word Up by Cameo would start playing, and I'd be like, well, that's Word Up by Cameo, so you know what that means. Time to end the show. So love doing that show. It was so much fucking work, as you could imagine from what I described. Now, also at this time, I was working, and am still working, a full-time day job. I was doing other stand-up sets, opening for people, doing shows here and there. And the guys who own the Wilbur Theater had approached me about doing a monthly talk show at this place, Johnny D's, which was kind of a legendary venue in Somerville, which is no longer there. So I was also, for 2013, doing this monthly talk show at Johnny D's called The Members Lounge. That was fun. It never quite gelled like the Secret Menu show did. But it was fun. It was, people came out, they did sort of presentations, and then we had a panel and I do games and stuff like that. we did that for a year, and then I did a TV pilot of that show, rejiggered a little bit. It was more like a panel show. So I had 2 panels of 3 people, each with a captain. And, we did a lot of segments that I did on the Members Lounge show. So I can't remember all of them now. It was 10 years ago. One of them was like, why do I own this? And I would have like a random item from my house that I owned, like, for example, a Bull Shannon puppet, or like a stack of High Times magazines, which, if you know me, is weird that I own. And then, each team would come up with a reason, like make up a story about why I owned it, and the audience would vote and they get points and that kind of stuff. There was one that we did called Yelp Reviews of Adult Businesses, which are real. And my wife, who's English and has a very great English accent, would read these Yelp reviews of adult businesses, which made them even funnier. I forget how you got points on that one, but that was one of them. So we shot a pilot for that, which I don't have, but was fun. And obviously no one bought that pilot. But anyway, so I was doing Members Lounge as well. And for some reason, doing all that, I was like, I should do a podcast. I started having the idea to do a podcast because I loved podcasts, early 2010s. I was listening to Dana Gouldauer, obviously, loved Janet Varney's JV Club, a lot of WTF, Doug Loves Movies, that sort of stuff. I couldn't come up with a good idea. I was pretty staunchly, don't do things if you don't have a good idea. Don't put out a comedy album or a special just to do it. I'm still kind of like that. Have it be something unique and worth doing, or, unique to the format. So for a long time, I had planned to do a comedy album that I was going to call, I think, Half Truths and Consequences. And my idea was it would sort of be half stand-up album and half podcast. So you would hear like a bit from my stand-up, a live show, and then you would hear like an edited piece where I interview people, real life people, friends, family, about that, what happened, to sort of get their POV, like how accurate am I on stage, sort of a Rashomon thing. I was working on that for like 2 years and couldn't quite ever make it work. But that I thought could be kind of an interesting podcast. After a year of Secret Menu, 2013, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Rick asked me if maybe I could do it once a month. So for 2014, I'm doing that once a month. So I have once a month Secret Menu now, once a month Members Lounge. And so I have some time, which sounds ridiculous because that already sounds like a lot of work, but I have some time. So I'm like, maybe I should do a podcast. Again, I have no idea. Sean Sullivan, again, my comedy muse, says, do the thing you do when we hang out at your house. So I should also mention, in 2009, I bought a house, and people would hang out here. I made sure I had a guest room so comics could stay here when they were traveling through town. And I had this big spinning rack of TV guides, and people would gravitate towards them and grab them and flip through them. And Sean's like, do that as a podcast. So I was like, brilliant idea, Sean. So I have the idea. I have the motivation, which is difficult for me. I've done Sketchfest, Riot, all these other shows. Doug Benson invites me to do Doug Loves Movies, so I start doing that. I started doing Keith and the Girl down in New York. And I had first met Kumail Nanjiani on a Montreal audition in like 2005, which is funny if you've seen The Big Sick, because that's portrayed in it. No one plays me. I'm not in there. No one cares about me. But I sort of reconnected with him because I was in LA and did a show with him, and him and Jonah Ray, who I hadn't met, were just about to do the Meltdown show on Comedy Central. And they were doing sort of a live tour as practice, and they were doing a Boston gig, and Kumail was like, oh, Ken, you're in Boston. Why don't you open the show? So I opened that show, and then ended up doing Meltdown a bunch of times over the years, meeting more people there. Became very friendly with more people through Bridgetown. That's where I met Laura Keitlinger and Dana Gould again, and stayed in touch with all these people. So I know some people, and I hate asking people favors, anything, but I'm like, all right, well, I know a bunch of comics, some of them of note. I could probably ask them to do this show when they're coming through town, so that might work. But then I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Enter Chris Duffy, who you would not have a TV guidance counselor show without Chris Duffy and Sean Sullivan. Chris Duffy is the most positive person I've ever met. He's doing stand-up. He also had a weekly or monthly live show that was also a podcast called You're the Expert. One of the most fun shows I've ever been on. I think I was on it like 20 times. It was a live show that was also a podcast. So Chris literally walked me through how you do a podcast. He was like, buy a Zoom H4n, you can get a used one. This is what an RSS feed is. Make sure you put it out every week at the same time. Get good album art for the show, like just everything. So, okay, I'm armed with Chris's knowledge. I asked Krista Weiss, who's still a comic and was on the show, to do the little TV Guidance Counselor logo for me. She does the first show art, which looked very cool. And I'm off to the races. That's where I'm at. It's January 2014. I have all the tools. I am now armed with what I think I can do for the podcast, and I didn't announce it or anything, but I was like, what I'll do is I'll record 5 or 10 episodes. If they're terrible, no one has to know this even happened, which is, you could still do that about a podcast. Weirdly, there are no episodes of the show that I've done that I pretend don't happen. Although, wouldn't I say that? I'd probably say that if that were the case. But you can do that if you have a show. First episode of the show on February 14th, 2014 is Mike Kaplan. This is not the first episode I recorded. The first episode I recorded is with Josh Gondelman, who's since gone on to be very, very successful and rightfully so. But he was still living in Boston. He hadn't quite moved to New York yet. But Mike I put out first because Mike was doing very well. He had moved to New York. I think he was on Last Comic Standing actively at that time, which incidentally stayed at my house a lot and borrowed a bunch of DVDs, and he literally just mailed them back to me like 2 months ago. But my DVD box set of Wonderfalls did appear in his season of Last Comic Standing. So Mike was my first episode that I released. I recorded, I think, 4. I think they came out pretty good, and put Mike's out. People liked it. I emailed everyone I knew. I was on a lot of message boards for like DVDs and horror movies and old TV shows. So I posted there and was annoying, and people started listening. I also was a tape trader for years, so I was trading tapes of old TV shows with people. So I kind of, said, hey, you might check this out. And those people started listening and enjoyed the show. And I was like, oh, maybe this is viable. I'll give this a year, like I did with Secret Menu. I'll see if I can do 52 episodes, which seemed completely insurmountable. Like, I was like, if I can do 52 episodes of this show, I will be over the moon. Because one of the things, and this is still the case, a lot of people start podcasts, they do a bunch, they're very enthusiastic right out of the gate, and then they just get sick of it and they just never do it again. They do like 10 in a row and then they're like, forget this, which I understand. But I was like, I'm not going to do that. So I keep going. Episode number 2 was Al Park. Al is a Boston comic, still a Boston comic, really funny, still around. There were 2 editions of Secret Menu that I was not in town for. One I was doing Bridgetown, I think, and one I was doing Riot, maybe. So I had 2 guest hosts twice. One of them was Al Park. And it was very funny. The episode he hosted was very funny. The yearbook session was very funny. And in hindsight, hilarious. Because I would like coach the people through like how to host a TV Guidance Counselor episode, which is bonkers. Like what a weird thing to do. Like yeah, this is how you do a yearbook session or whatever. So Al was one of those people. Good dude, had a really fun time talking to him. The thing I recall most about his episode is I keep it really cold in my house, and this was January, February recording, and he was like, your house is under 60 degrees. I'm like, that's right. So that was Al. Very funny. Episode 2. Then I do one with Tom Dustin. Tom, again, incredibly funny, Boston comic, has an album out. He's since moved to the Florida Keys. Incredibly Boston-y. That was a lot of fun. I had Tom on. Tom had done some really fun stuff on Secret Menu. And Tom's like more of a traditional stand-up, I guess. Him and Joe List are and were very tight. But Tom also was up for doing weird stuff. So like I first noticed this on the Walsh Brothers Great and Secret show that I haven't even discussed, but I did stuff on with them, with Sean Sullivan and Nate Johnson and Chris Cox and Renata Tutko. And Tom would be up for whatever. Like, I think one time they made him be a ventriloquist dummy. One time they carried him in a duffel bag, like just weird stuff. So he would do stuff on Secret Menu, and that was really cool. And that was a fun episode. Episode 4, March 5th, 2014, is Kelly McFarland. Kelly's still good friend, very funny comic, has her own podcast now with Kath Ferris about, I think it's called like Fears or something. I'll put a link to it in here. But again, someone I've known for years, really, really love talking to her. And it's starting to snowball a little bit. Like, people are liking the show. Again, pretty much all local comics at this point, local comics that have done some, were of note, like, and that I liked, who are doing some pretty cool stuff, but local comics nonetheless. Also at this time, I still had the Tumblr, the tvguidance.com is a Tumblr, and it still exists. But one of the things I was doing was, obviously I was doing this all in person, was the person, their notes for the episode. I would scan their actual notes and then post it with the episode, which I thought was pretty cool. But then I started realizing that a bunch of people don't like doing that. So I stopped kind of doing that. But I do have, for like the first 10 or 12 episodes, I have like the actual notes for people, including Alex Edelman, who's coming up in a bit, but I'm just looking at that on my photos. And Alex has gone on to be wildly successful. Also, I should mention, from Riot that year, I was at I did the KCRW show, and I, told some stories on the KCRW show in LA. I did that show with Bobcat and Steve Young and Thomas Lennon, and who else was on that show? They come up because I think I made them all, try to get them all be on the show. And that was really cool. Again, got a lot of attention from that, met more people doing that, started to get some press. I was in the Boston Globe, I was in Time Out New York, I was in the New York Times for various things. And that was cool. So episodes coming out, I start to know more people. We end on, where were we here? With Kelly McFarland in March. Let me go back to the episodes. This is a little bit wonky. Kelly McFarland. And then episode 5, this being the first episode that I recorded, is Josh Gondelman. And this was very fun. I love Josh. What a good dude. Josh I've known forever. He's doing very well now. You probably hear him on Wait, Don't Tell Me often. He's got a bunch of comedy albums out. This was right when I think he moved to New York, but was back here a lot. Also, the first edit I did on the show was, which is funny now in hindsight, was Josh. I forget exactly how it came up. We were talking about nicknames, and Josh said there was a kid in his high school they called Period Fucker. And I was like, this might be too much for the show. So I cut that out. Also, if you look at the times, like how long the shows are, they tend to be under an hour. Like, I was shooting for 45 minutes was like my goal. I was like, no one's going to listen to this for more than 45 minutes, which is insane. Now that I know 10 years on, but that was my operating, how I was operating under. The same week that I did that Josh Gondelman one, was still kind of not really feeling out the format of the show per se, but sort of expanding a little bit from primetime. And we did a Saturday morning special, and that was with Sean Sullivan, who, as I said earlier, was sort of the muse, the guy who told me to do the show. And I love Saturday mornings, and that was a very fun sort of bonusy episode. Not numbered, so that's where I think this episode is like 630 or something, but in the actual scheme of things is like 680 something, because there's a bunch that I didn't number. I didn't start numbering everything till later. The next one was Julia Rossi, and Julia is a Boston comic initially, but had moved to New York and then LA, and I knew her from what was the show she used to do? Strip Stories, maybe? It was like a Mortified type show, but it was like sex stories. And I had done that show a lot, despite not really having any sex stories. And Julia was so fun. She was psyched to do the show. I believe she said her family used to call her the walking TV guide. So, that it really, it pointed to that thing that even though, I mean, her and I are very similar age, we're from the same area, we're both comedians, obviously we'd have a lot in common, but that so many people whose work I gravitated towards, or friends or people who I liked, all had this same kind of experience growing up and sort of being somewhat TV obsessive and, wanting to know what's on. The next one was Dan Crone, another still local, very funny Boston comics. Got a couple of albums out that are worth getting. You might have heard Dan on the WTF podcast after he was on mine. So just saying. Nothing to do with the other. And then it was Bethany Van Delft, and Bethany is an old comedy friend. She's not old, but she's an old friend of mine. And if you heard my roundup of last year, her and I were on WBUR a ton in the last year. So we still work together frequently. If you like hearing us on BUR, listen to that episode. You heard the dogs in the background there, which is funny because I didn't even have a dog at this point. We just had Bink, who we lost in January 2023, who you couldn't hear in the episodes, but you could in the last year when she was a little senile. In fact, all the intros that I recorded for these episodes, I was in my closet sitting on a pile of t-shirts with my recorder. No mic, just a recorder in my hand. And surprisingly, they sound pretty good. I had not yet learned how to do like compression and normalization and the sort of making things sound a little bit better, noise reduction or all that stuff. I'll get to that in a moment, but they sound pretty good for what I had. I was also still doing the stereo thing at this point where, one of us is in one speaker, one was in the other. Anyway, yeah, Bethany was great. Episode 9 was Hari Kondabolu, and Hari, you probably know, he was doing well at the time, but is doing even better now, also on Wait, Don't Tell Me often. And when I mentioned earlier that we got a spare bedroom in our house so that comics could stay with us, Hari was staying with us. So I started kind of being like, well, if you're going to stay at my house, why don't you do the podcast while you're here? And this was a really long episode at the time. I was like, I might have to break this up into 2 parts. Again, hilarious in hindsight. We had a great chat. And so this episode, I was kind of like, maybe I don't have to break it up into 2 parts. Maybe they can be long. And I kind of just stopped worrying about the length of the show and just kind of let them be what they were. So that was Hari's episode. Episode 10 was Alex Edelman. You absolutely know Alex now. I think he was nominated for like a Tony or something. His show, Just Between Us, is massive. He's on TV. He was doing well at this time. I think he had gone to the UK and started doing comedy there and had done a show at Edinburgh, I think. But I was amazed. I had known Alex since he was like 12 or 13 or something like that when he used to come to a late night show I did with the Walsh Brothers. So having Alex here was interesting. He then went back to LA. He wrote on TV shows. Like, just insane to see all these people do so well. Not insane, insane good, because it's nice to see them doing well. Then I tried again. We did another Saturday morning. I was like, maybe I'll do these Saturday mornings once a month. That was kind of my idea. I didn't keep it going because the Saturday morning shows kind of were the same for a while. I don't know. I forget why I stopped, but I only did a few of them. But this was with Raj Silvaraman. Raj, very funny. He is also a scientist. He has a child now. It's funny looking back at these when people didn't have a kid and all this other stuff. But that's a fun episode. April of 2014, episode 11 was my friend Lillian Devane, who I haven't seen in a really long time. That's what's really interesting with this. There's all these people who used to be here and I haven't seen them in forever. And I'm like, man, where are these people? Like, I really enjoyed talking to them. And Lillian was a good comedy friend. I should email her now, actually. Came on the show. She eventually moved to New York and then moved. I think she's in Portland now. But I remember, very fun episode. Lillian talks about true crime. This is all from memory, by the way. I didn't go back and listen to all these episodes. And also, she's the person who told me about Instagram. So I remember when she was over here that day, she was like, oh, you should go on Instagram. And I was like, what is that? And she's like, it's like Twitter, but just pictures. And I was like, that sounds dumb, but I'll sign up for it. And 10 years later, I'm still on Instagram. So blame Lillian. The next episode, this is a big deal. So this was my friend Angie Creedon. She is a DJ and one of my oldest friends. I know her from when I worked at WFNX and radio. She had lived in LA and Las Vegas and moved back to Massachusetts sort of recently when I had her on the show. And she brought her kid over, who is now like 20 something, which is hilarious and is in college. But after this show, when I had Angie on, we decided to meet up that weekend at Cane's Donuts in Saugus, Mass, and meet up for breakfast. And then on the way home, Rachel and I stopped at the dog shelter because we like to look at dogs, and we got Pete. So this was the week that we got Pete, who is sitting next to me right now. And I have to say, this made me a little bit sad because I love Pete. We have 2 other dogs as well. But it just reminds me how he's getting old. He'll be 11 in August. And I just actually yesterday had to make a surgery appointment for him. So in March, first week in March, he's got some masses that are going to be removed. But he should be okay. But I'm so upset because I don't want to get into the whole thing about dogs, but I love them so much and they've been such an enrichment to my life. And, we don't get to have them that long. And so reminders of that are always kind of upsetting. But I also want to thank you guys who have been supporting the show financially, everyone who's a patron over the years, because the surgery is very expensive, and you've helped me cover most of it. So that, like Pete thanks you, I thank you. So yeah, if you're thinking of it the first week of March, just send Pete some good vibes. Because we lost Bink last year, and I want Pete around for a couple more years, or as long as he wants to be, but at least a couple more years. Anyway, I'll stop being upset now. Episode 13. This was a huge deal because this was kind of the first celebrity that I didn't know well having them on the show. So I was in LA in January. I flew back to New York because I had an audition for Last Comic Standing that I did not want to do. I had said no a billion times. I had been on them before. I kind of hated that show. And then they were like, oh, but this will be different. It's not going to be like a reality game show. This will be more like pure stand-up. And it was an absolutely horrible audition. It was just like the worst day. I went and I just stuffed my face with pie and played video games. But one of the highlights was while I was in New York, I talked to Danny Tamborelli, and we had friends of friends who hooked me up with Danny. I'm a massive Adventures of Pete and Pete fan, which I mean, this is probably not the first episode that you've listened to of the show, I hope. And if it is, kudos to you for being whatever we are, 45 minutes in and still being here. But Danny, again, someone I loved growing up, didn't know him at all. Sort of blindly went in and talked to him for the show. I'm absolutely way too excited. You can tell I'm speaking too fast, but so cool. And this is when I was like, wow, we got a person I didn't already know who's a celebrity on the show. That's bonkers. Like, wow, maybe there'll be more of this coming up. And there is. That's a spoiler. Next guy was Nat Townsend. Nat is another Boston guy. I almost said Nate Johnson, who's on later in the year. Nat is another Boston guy who went to school here, went to Emerson. I was talking to him about doing the show. He was back up here doing some shows. He was so supportive of the show. Such a good dude. Still in New York doing shows. Had a lot of fun on that one. And then episode 15 is Ryan Walsh. And Ryan was in a band called Hallelujah the Hills. I think still is in that band, technically. The band's basically him. Who had contacted me like 3 or 4 years into when I was doing stand-up. He had seen me at the Comedy Studio and liked me and wanted me to open a record release show for Hallelujah the Hills, who were great. And I stayed in touch with Ryan, funny, smart guy. He had just written a big piece for Boston Magazine about when Van Morrison was in Boston, 1968, recording, I think, Astro Weeks, which ended up turning into an entire book, which Ryan comes back on the show later, a couple of years later when he finished the book, and we talked about 1968. But again, sort of expanding the people that I know just from comics, Angie I knew from radio, Ryan from music, although sort of via comedy, sort of expanding what we do. Episode 16, this one was great. So Adam Resnick, who directed Cabin Boy, Chris Elliott's writing partner, he wrote a great memoir that I loved. Very dark, but I really identified with it. It's very, very good. I think it's called Will Not Attend. And he was doing a book event, and Rob Crean was, I believe, in charge of sort of booking the event. And we ended up doing the event as a live TV guidance counselor, like a de facto live TV guidance counselor. I'd planned to bring my stuff and record with him after the show, but we ended up just doing that as the show. So this is sort of the first in front of an audience one. We're only 4 or 5 months into the show, and the thing that surprised me a ton was how much of the stuff I thought happened way later happened in this first year of the show. Like having the celebrities on, doing live ones, like this is all in the first year, and that's kind of a whirlwind. But Adam was so awesome. We instantly clicked. Such a good dude. I had such a good talk with him and loved so much of the stuff he worked on. That was really fun. Episode 17 is Jenny Zagrino, who's been on a couple times. Jenny, again, old comedy friend, doing very well, had moved to LA, was here doing some shows, so I grabbed her to be on the show. And this is actually the show where the Pod Gods guys found me, because Jenny and I talk about Loveline quite a bit, and Gio is a big Loveline guy, found the show because Loveline was in the show notes, and they're the ones who gave me so much good advice on how to make the show sound better. So, the compressor and using Audacity and that kind of stuff, numbering the shows, releasing them in the episode order that I record them in, all very helpful, both him and Lax, who I am grateful for to this day. But again, they found me on episode 17, like early in the show's run. Again, that surprised me. My memory was sort of different of that. And incidentally, at this point, a lot of people were finding the show through sort of keywords. So I would do, and I still do, these exhaustive notes about the show pre-AI about what we talked about. And so people would Google something, pretty obscure at the time, like Misfits of Science. And my show is one of the things that would come up, and they'd listen and enjoy it. And a lot of you are still around. So that was a case of that here. Now, episode 18. This is when stuff takes an interesting turn. So May of 2014, I said, I'm going to go to LA and try to get some people that I don't know to be on the show whose stuff I love. And at the time, I think it was mostly Facebook I would contact people through, back when I was still using that. Some people had their own websites. I would contact them, email them there. But I ended up booking this massive list of people that I recorded with in May 2014. My good friend Shane Moss was living right across from Malibu Beach. He was touring, as was his girlfriend at the time. So I had a free place to stay right on Malibu Beach. It was just such a good time. Like I was doing shows, I was on the Meltdown, I was by day sort of meeting up with these people whose work I loved, doing this podcast. It was right on Malibu Beach. Just felt like I was doing it, this is amazing. I'm not like I was doing it, but like doing the thing. And I look back so fondly on that. It's giving me warm memories now. I do mourn the loss of I think it's Aunt Victoria's almond water, which they used to only have in LA and used to taste like vacation to me. Oh, it's so good. Almondade. I have a recipe for it, but it's not the same. They had a coconut one and just at the beach in May. And yeah. Anyway, so what I'm getting at is the first episode that I put out from that little trip was Joanne Willette. And Joanne is originally a person from Maine. She has done a ton of stuff. She was doing a lot of storytelling stuff, which is how I kind of knew her a little bit, because I'd been doing stuff like Risk and This American Life and, those kinds of shows. She had an amazing, heartbreaking story about the loss of her fiance at the time. And she agreed to do the show, and we became friends, and she could not be cooler or nicer. And I am a huge fan of just the 10 of us. So it was amazing to get to hang out with her. She gave me one of her scripts, which I still have. It's right next to me now. That just so nice. And I couldn't believe that someone like her, like Danny earlier, said yes to do my dumb show. Why? There's nothing in it for them. And they had fun, and it was just a casual, friendly chat. And I started realizing these are just people I would like to be friends with, that we have something in common. It's just very conversational and cool. The next one, episode 19, was Michael Ian Black. This one actually recorded when I got back. He was doing a show at Johnny D's where I was doing the talk show. And I didn't know, I knew Mike a little bit. I had sort of introduced him and Showalter, I think, at a show they did at the Paradise when we were doing a show in the front room. But so I just kind of reached out to him and he said, let's do it. And this one was very funny. Like there are still things I quote to this day that he said in this episode. For example, and I do like that. Yeah, he called Paul Rudd during the episode, which was really fun. So that was cool. Episode 20 is Shane Moss himself. This is when I was staying with Shane. He was there for a couple of days. Incidentally, he went hiking right as soon as I left and broke both of his ankles and his heels. And it was like a years-long process for him to get back on his feet, literally. And he's doing good now, but man, that was brutal for him. Super fun. Love talking to Shane. And that's a thing I always say to this day, like in addition to meeting and talking to people whose work I love, who I've watched for years or always wanted to talk to. This show is also a really good excuse for someone I've known forever to sit down and talk to them at length, because you really don't get to do that much these days. So that's always also been very, very nice, sort of not rediscovering friendships, but like being able to do that with a friend is just cool. I just happen to record it. The joke I used to make a lot of times when people started saying yes to the show, and this is a very crude incident, but I was like, it's almost like, if you were like, hey, can I pay you for sex? And they'd be like, no, that's prostitution. It's illegal. And you're like, what if I film it? And they're like, well, now it's pornography and that's fine. So this is kind of like, hey, person I don't know, can I come and talk to you for an hour? And it's like, that's weird. No, it's like, what if I record it? Absolutely. Come on over. It sort of still blew my mind that this was a thing. Anyway, episode 21, we're in June 24th. We're on this will be my 34th birthday this week that episode came out, was Laura Keitlinger. And Laura, to this day, is one of the funniest people I know. I've admired her for so long. I was just on her podcast at the tail end of last year. I had met her doing Bridgetown Comedy Festival, and she was super nice to me, gave me her email address. We stayed in touch. She was like, you're welcome to stay at our house if you come to LA. So I took her up on it. I was staying at Shane's. Malibu's like a half-hour drive to like LA proper, like where the shows are and stuff, Hollywood and all that. So I stayed with Laura for a couple of days, and Garrett, who's awesome. And we recorded, and just amazing stories, so cool. And an episode that'll come out a little later in August, because I would bank all these, because they're not like timely shows, right? So like in LA, I did like 20 episodes or something, and then released them over the next couple months. So the Laura Keitlinger episode I recorded, and then the next day I recorded with Janet Varney, because Janet lives literally across, or I don't know if she still lives there, but she lived literally across the street from Laura. So it was a really cool thing to be able to kind of just walk across there and do the show. Episode 23, this was amazing. Lorraine Newman. Lorraine is an absolute legend, is a sweetheart and a true comedy fan. I met Lorraine because she came to shows at Riot LA, like as just like a audience member, and like the show that I was on, and we talked and stayed in touch, and she agreed to do the show, and I went to her house, and it was so fun. I'm still in touch with her. She recommended her sister to be on the show later, which is not this year, I think a year after that. She has an amazing memoir that is Audible only, that is a must listen, especially if you like that episode or like my show. So now stuff starts sort of snowball. I keep saying snowballing, and I'm making like rolling motions with my hands, like I'm in the Four Tops that you can't see. Not in the Four Tops that you can't see, which would be an interesting name for a band. But you can't see me doing this Four Tops motion. But the more people I start having on, Like, this is early days, so not everyone was getting asked to do podcasts all the time. A lot of these people that I reached out to had never really done a lot of interviews or about their work. So it was sort of easier for me to talk to people and get them on the show. And Lorraine was a big one, like, because the other thing was, once they see who else was on the show, they were more likely to say yes. They're like, I've heard of Lorraine Newman. I've heard of that person. And so that started to help me as well. The next one was a summer special edition. Again, still kind of playing with that extra episodes outside of the prime time. And I have Lamont Price. And Lamont I wanted to save for a special episode because Lamont is a close friend, very funny comic, very similar to me. Love Lamont so much. Probably one of the most popular guests I have on the show. You guys are always complimenting those episodes and asking when's Lamont coming back. Have him later on a bunch of Halloween episodes. And this was the first one, and this is very fun. It was just nice to have Lamont on. Episode 24 is Brendan Boogie, who is a filmmaker now, but at the time was a musician. I think just getting into making films. And some of the musicians in Boston were sort of comedy adjacent. The musicians were comedy fans and the comedians were music fans. And a lot of musicians who book shows would often have comics on the lineup. And, you know, Brendan was one of those guys, and Brendan's really interesting guy, smart guy, fun guy. And I was happy to have him on the show. Episode 25, a milestone. I didn't think I'd get to 25 episodes, even though I think this is like 27 or something, but the numbering, yeah. Melanie Chardoff. Melanie is amazing. Melanie is so cool. You know her as Miss Musso from Parker Lewis or the mom on Rugrats. Went to her house, we hung out, we chatted. She had such great stories. Later in 2016, when I did my second album, she gave me some great notes that I, made the album so much better. She's awesome. Like, I only had positive experiences with all of these celebrity people I didn't know at the time that I had on the show, which was astounding. It was like each one was nicer and cooler than the last. It was the kind of thing where I was like, oh, the Don't Meet Your Heroes, that's garbage because my heroes are amazing. I skipped an episode. Sorry. Episode 22, James Adomian. James is so talented and amazing, and I knew him from doing festivals in New York. This is where we started trying to float that fans of the show would be called Jelly Breads. Didn't catch on, but is a funny reason why. But I loved having James on. Anyway, where was I? Melanie. Episode 26. This was also in LA. I recorded this in the Nerdist Studios at Meltdown because I'd been doing the Meltdown show with Kumail and Jonah, and they had extra studios. So this is Kumail Nanjiani. Kumail was doing well at this time. I think he was just on Silicon Valley, but he wasn't yet a superhero. I had opened shows for him and done a bunch of shows with him, and it was really nice of him to do this. I think this is also the first guest I had on who didn't grow up in America, and hearing about the shows they experienced in their home country before they went to America and what American shows we exported there was really, really fascinating. This is a fun episode. I might go back and listen to this myself. And also seeing like how amazing Kumail has done since then. I met him originally too. I think I mentioned this earlier in the episode, doing auditions for Montreal. This is before he did The Big Sick. I think he had just gotten word that he would get to be on the new X-Files. He was doing an X-Files podcast, I think, called the X-Files Files. And he told me I had to keep it under my hat. I remember that. Episode 27, Janet Varney, as I mentioned before, huge fan of the JV Club. It was a massive influence on my show. Seeing her do a live one at Bridgetown was so good. And Janet was and is super supportive and nice of everything I've done. Walked across the street from Laura Keitlinger's and recorded with Janet, and it was very fun. She's the best. Episode 28, this one was interesting. This one is Rick Sloan, and Rick is the director of the Vice Academy movies, Hobgoblins, a bunch of movies that are known as sort of the worst movies of all time kind of stuff. And Rick's a fascinating guy. I got to go to his house. He's got all the props from all his movies, which was cool. He had also written a published TV Guide crossword puzzle. So I got to see that. He's also a collector. I bought some TV guides from him. He's the world's leading expert on Archie comics. Like, fascinating guy. Again, who I didn't know. I only knew his work. I used to listen to his commentary tracks all the time. So it was just cool to be able to reach out, and then I'm like at the person's house talking to them about their work. And that was very fun. Episode 29, Jared Logan and Kara Klink, who are still married. They have 2 kids now. Two of the funniest people I know. And again, I know them from when I would host at the Comedy Studio. They would come through town. They were both New York based at this time, and I believe they're both in LA now. But this was, I think, the second couple or the first couple, might be the first couple I had on the show. And this was really fun because they both picked from the same issue. So it was a different dynamic, which I thought was really cool. Episode 30 is Matt Knudsen, and Matt I had met at the comedy festivals. He was doing either Bridgetown or Riot, was friendly with Zach Sherwin and Mike Kaplan. We went out to lunch. Really just positive, funny, nice guy. This is when I recorded out in Malibu with him out there. When I was staying at Shane's, he came to Shane's house, and I did ask Shane if it was okay if I invited people over his house, I think. Sorry, Shane, if I didn't. That's rude. But super fun with Matt. We talked about hunks a lot. Episode 31, September 2014. Jonathan Katz. Legendary, easily one of the funniest people I know, like top 3. No contest. And I know a lot of funny people. And I'd met Jonathan years before. He was looking for an assistant, and I interviewed for that, but then we stayed in touch. I'm a huge Dr. Katz fan. No one makes me laugh like Jonathan. He's just so funny and quick, and he'll walk you down paths. We did some live talk shows together. He did sort of a live Jonathan Katz, Dr. Katz kind of thing prior to that. And I went to his house and just had such a good time. This is the first episode that I did a stinger. So I think you all know that by now. After the last moment, there's like a funny out of context clip that I'll put at the end of the episode. And Jonathan said something that was so funny when I was so nervous and just speedily talking. He said, Ken, this is, and I said, oh, thank you. And he goes, you didn't let me finish. This is a disgrace. And I think I put that at the end of the episode as like a little sting for the show. And you can thank Jonathan for that. Just what an awesome guy. He also has a podcast that I have been on. It comes out intermittently, but is very funny. Episode 32, Tim Brennan of the Dropkick Murphys. Now, this is someone from my previous life, my music life, when I was in a punk rock band. I would later, I think in year 2, do this punk rock appendix episode, I called it. But Tim was in Dropkick Murphys. I knew Tim from that era. I don't think he was in Dropkicks when I first met him. But he was in later. But Tim, speaking of the musicians who love comedy, big comedy fan, would come to my shows sometimes, and also we sort of rekindled our relationship, which sounds weird, when I did Doug Loves Movies earlier that year at Brighton Music Hall. And Tim was at the show. So we stayed in touch. He listened to the show. I asked him to be on. We were on. Tim did an amazing episode of the show, Song Exploder, I think it's called, or Song Collider, where they take like one song and just interview all the musicians about writing it and recording it. And Tim does it for, I think, Shipping Up to Boston. Just fun. Tim's awesome. I love Tim. Episode 33, Andy Kindler. Andy's a guy I didn't know, but knew, obviously knew people who knew Andy. He was coming to Laugh Boston, which had just opened, incidentally. I think they're on their 10th anniversary too. Just opened, and so I emailed him and was like, can we do the show? Did it in the green room. Was very fun. Andy's a fun guy. Episode 34. This is a big one. Julia Duffy. I love Julia. I loved Julia before this. She's one of my favorite actresses. She's so funny in everything. And I love her even more after doing this episode with her, and even more now. She is just one of the best human beings of ever my life. We've stayed in touch. She's a friend and just awesome. Awesome. She's in a new show on Apple Plus called, I think, Palm Springs. But she's just so good in everything. And she was in Boston doing a play. I think she was doing Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Malcolm Jamal Warner in it as well. And so I emailed... I knew the people running the theater, so I kind of hooked up with her that way. We did the episode. It was so fun. She has great stories. Like, I was in awe of her the whole time because I watched Newhart so much and everything she had done. And this one is like another sort of turning point again for me because I'd had some great people on. And then this was sort of like another notch up in my eyes to have Julia on. Episode 35, Ahmed Barucha. Ahmed doing very well. Bunch of movies, bunch of TV shows. Rhode Island guy, but sort of started the Boston scene. One of my favorite comics. I had him open one of my one-man shows. I think my music to my years show. Just funny, awesome dude, and just a solid, good guy. He had moved out to LA. We recorded it at his house. I stayed with him later, and there was an incident where there was a mouse in the house, and he and I were like screaming, and his wife was like, "What the hell?" Just like picked the thing up and threw it outside. But I love Ahmed. And I haven't talked to him in a while. I should talk to Ahmed. Episode 36, Michelle Balloon. She's a Philly comic, but her husband at the time was from Cape Cod, I think. So they were up in the Boston area often. She would stop by usually and do like a Friday night show when I was hosting at the Comedy Studio. So I knew her from there. Incredibly funny. Asked her to be on the show. We recorded this in Central Square, I think, in the hotel that her and her husband were staying at. And just really fun. This might be the first one I recorded in a hotel, which is interesting to me. I don't know if that's interesting to you. Interesting to me. Dan Bulger's episode 37. Dan won the Boston Comedy Festival and was one of the guys that sort of really broke out quickly from the scene that I started in. He's still around and incredibly funny. He did a really great set from Don't Tell Comedy that you can watch on YouTube. Dan's such an affable, seemingly easygoing guy whose brain is a lot sharper and faster than you would imagine. He sort of lulls you into a false sense of security and is just a killer. He's the best. That was a fun one. Then this is huge. Live. My first official live one. The one with Adam Resnick was sort of a fluke or was not a planned live one. But October 2014, Amy Sedaris. So this, I had been approached by the people who do New York Comic Con, and they were doing a series of programming for the nighttime. Because at cons, there's usually nothing going on at night. So I think their idea was we'll also program things for people to do that people going to New York Comic Con will like at nighttime. And so they asked me to do a live one. So I was like, I don't know who I could have on this. And I knew Amy because she had been given an award for the Women in Comedy Festival the year before. And I presented the award to her, and her and I were talking this at the Wilbur Theater. We started talking about television. She mentioned that she loved a show growing up called East Side, West Side, with George C. Scott. And would love to see it again. And I had it. I had been tape trading for years, so I had it on DVD, so I mailed it to her. And we were in touch and, stayed friendly and wanted to go down to New York. I'd meet up with her for coffee, which is funny because she would pretend I was her husband to the waiter. She'd be like, you didn't ask my husband if he wants sugar. He doesn't. And she's just so cool and just the best weirdo. And she agreed to do the show, which I couldn't believe. She really didn't do podcasts. Didn't do a ton of interviews. Stranger with Candy is one of my favorite things. I was into her work since Exit 57. So we did it at the Brooklyn Brewery. It was a huge crowd, which was awesome. I did misplace where to put the mic, the recorder. I think I put it in the back of the room. I really should have kept it on the stage with us because the way I had the setup. So the sound on this is a little bit abysmal, but is listenable. And there's some just really funny stuff from Amy in this episode. But this was where I was like, oh, I can do live ones and people come out to see it and like bona fide celebrities will do the show. That's amazing. Episode 38, Vanessa Angel. One of my favorite human beings on earth. We are still friends today. I can't believe this was 10 years ago. Always thought she was very funny, from Kingpin and Weird Science, kind of an underrated comedic genius. Really smart and fun. And I'd never really heard an interview with her. So I was curious to speak to her. Went to her house, where she was living at the time, which happened to be Paul Michael Glazer's old house, which is funny because I had him on the show later. Incidentally, when I had him on the show later, after his episode, leaving his house, I was going to meet up with Vanessa for lunch. Weirdly, didn't plan it that way. But this is really fun. Vanessa's very funny and charming, and that was a really fun one. Another special episode came out as I was still doing these kind of once a month. Lamont Price is back. I think he's the first returning guest. Lamont comes back for another Saturday morning episode. He had done a summer one previously. This was a Saturday. This was really fun. Again, Lamont, very popular guest. People love Lamont. I love Lamont. You love Lamont. But this is when I was still doing those sort of special episodes. Whew, I've been talking too much. Hold on. I need a little water. So we're in the home stretch now. We are at the end of October, and we get the first, there's 2 episodes first. Episode 39, Tim McIntyre. I mentioned him earlier when he hosted the Thursday Night Fight show. One of the first Boston comics I befriended when I came back from England was Tim. Loved having him on the show. And then Abby Launder, who is now married to Ahmed Barucha, 2 kids, ridiculously cute kids. Abby was the sort of creator behind Riot LA, which is still amazingly impressive. As a producer, produces huge comedy festivals now because she's brilliant. Really fun episode. She is one of the few people on earth whose childhood rivals mine for insanity. And so that's a fun one. Then we get our first Halloween special. So this one is a bit different. It's short. I think it's like 20 minutes. I still have them, but I haven't updated them. I have these Excel spreadsheets of Halloween, Christmas, holiday episodes. So I kind of went through that solo. This is my first solo episode, and made some recommendations of things people could watch on Halloween. It's kind of different. People liked it. I did it later. We'll get to them for the other holidays. Episode 41, Andre Gower. So Gower, I recorded this in LA. You know him from the Monster Squad. You know him from so many things. Became a really good friend. Every time we'd go to LA after this recording in 2014, either me or my wife, or me and my wife would meet up with him at BB's in Burbank, which he told us about. Fantastic breakfast place. I cannot recommend it more highly. And just hang out. And, someone again, I didn't know Andre Gower. I think emailed him from his website. He had just moved back to LA. Was just sort of getting back into the business. Had just an amazing chat, got along really well, and just became friends, like genuine friends. And that was, Monster Squad was so important to me as a kid. But it was awesome. Like, again, nobody disappointed me. Speaking of which, this is the closest we got to it. I've told this story a billion times on the show, but just for posterity's sake. Episode 42, Dave Vanian and Captain Sensible of The Damned. Now, The Damned are easily my favorite punk rock band. They are the reason I like punk rock, I would say. Caught them on the Young Ones when I was 5, doing Video Nasty. Vanian, coolest guy ever. I knew their drummer, who had been in different bands. There was also their manager I knew from when I was in bands. She was managing a bunch of big punk bands. Stormy, she's super cool. And I was bad at asking anyone for any favors, but I said, I see the Damned are coming to town. I'm going to ask Stormy if maybe they'll do the show. She surprisingly was like, oh, so good to hear from you. Yeah, let's have him do it. Dave doesn't really do interviews, so Cap will have to do it. Gives me his email. Cap and I go back and forth. He's like, I hate TV. And I'm like, that's cool. We can talk about that. So I go to the show. I have treated like royalty. Incidentally, it's at Royale in Boston, which I think is still called that. I have on the side of the stage, I have full access to everything. They play, they're just incredible. They're a band who just gets better as they get older, weirdly, live. After the show, I'm talking to Cap, I'm backstage, and he bails on me after 10 minutes because he was like, I don't watch TV, and on stage he had referenced The Prisoner and Phantom of the Paradise, and so I was like, oh, you said you don't watch TV, but, I heard you reference those. Were you into the sort of stranger UK sci-fi shows and that stuff? He's like, I'm turning it in the interview. You want to talk to Dave? That's terrible. Walks out. So I felt awful. I'm like, what did I do wrong? I'm very new at this. I'm not a journalist. I'm not an interviewer. I'm just some idiot. I can't use this. This is terrible. And then I see Dave sitting there with a glass of wine, and I said, whatever, I'll ask him. And I asked him, he said, yeah, sit down, we'll chat. We chat about horror movies, stuff I'd never heard him talk about. It was so fun. It ended up being so much better talking to Dave. I kept both things in. I think the stinger in this one is kept saying I'm terminating the interview. But this, I still to this day talk about this. This was a huge musical heroes of mine. I think the first band that I didn't personally know on the show. And, I have an audio recording of me talking to them, comes out on Halloween. I got to go to this amazing show. The show ends up being sort of like a audio scrapbook for me sometimes. It's weird to have that. It's weird to have, 60 hours of conversations that you had every week for a year from 10 years ago. It really is. It's very surreal and sort of an out-of-body, uncanny experience. But I have it. And, it exists. It's there. That's a really, really pivotal point in the show, I will say. Like a big, not a turning point, but a big escalation. So the next episode, I think, is the last one I recorded in that May trip where I did all those episodes. This one I held because we're actually talking about a Halloween week, so I thought it was appropriate. This is Clark Wolf, who's gone on to do a bunch of amazing things, has moved back to Atlanta, I believe, but is still doing horror movie stuff. Had been doing some stuff with Nerdist. I met her through Lorraine Newman. Lorraine actually invited her over the day that we were recording, probably in case I was like a maniac, which I'm not, but was like, oh, you'll really like Clark's horror, like same stuff you do. So while I'm recording with Lorraine, Clark is kind of sitting next to me there, and then we recorded this episode in North Hollywood. I think it was my first time in North Hollywood. Met her very cute dog. I love her dog Rufus. And this is a fun one. We talked horror movies, we talked TV. Clark's super smart. Later, I recommended her for running some of the panels at Denver Comic-Con, so we hung out there. Still doing great. Check Clark's stuff out. She's awesome. Now we get to another escalation. You see how this is like building levels here as we go into the end of the year. And again, this is a prime example of how I can't believe this was all in the first year. This is another live one. This is live as part of the Boston Comedy Festival. Emmanuel Lewis. Now, Manny, it was friends Jim McHugh, who runs the Boston Comedy Festival with his sister. I think Jim knew him from like cruise ships, maybe, but Manny would come and be a judge at the Boston Comedy Festival every year. Again, doesn't do a ton of interviews. It was kind of a weird, random thing that he would come do these things. So I asked if I could have a live one with him, and we did, and it's awesome. Like, he's super funny and charming. We talk about all the questions, the burning questions I had about Webster and all the stuff he worked on over the years. This blew my mind, this episode. This one got a ton of traction because, again, he didn't do a ton of episodes. So this is when I started to get a ton of Google alerts, like, see what Webster is doing now, and like in an interview with this show. And so I started to get a lot more people listening to the show. Sort of with each of the sort of celebrities that were on the show, I would get more and more people, and then they would go back and listen to the back catalog. But this one was like, double, triple the numbers. I mean, I think I was still getting a few hundred listeners a week, which was insane to me. Like, I couldn't believe there were that many people. I was used to performing for less than 100 people a week on a live show. So the fact that there was multiple hundreds of people and they were all over the world, I was like, why are they doing this? Amazing. This is a really fun one. Again, this is sort of a linchpin episode in this first year's evolution of TV Guidance Counselor. Episode 44 is Wendell Meldrum. I recorded this in LA. Wendell's super funny, great actress. She was in The Pursuit of Happiness with Paul Provenza. She was on Miss White, I believe her name was, on Wonder Years, which is really where I knew her from. She's a writer and just a fascinating person. Very, very interesting chat. I really like talking to her. Episode 45, Tim Vargulish. Tim is sort of, I think of him and Ahmed Barucha as a paired set. Even though they're both married. Tim and Ahmed were both Rhode Island comics. They're pretty inseparable. You always saw one with the other. And Tim, funny, weird, moved to LA, kind of stopped doing stand-up, started doing writing comics, which he still does, and they're great. But again, an old friend that I like just sitting down and having a chat with. Episode 46, Best Mata. This one was again in LA. I rented this on Airbnb. I used to rent this house in the Hollywood Hills. There was a guest, it used to be the wine cellar of this big house in the hills by Lake Hollywood. And I loved this apartment so much. It was kind of like I would like LARP that I lived in LA when I had this apartment. It was right by sort of Warner Brothers in Burbank. And there's few things in my life that I look back and have nothing but fond memories of. And like this time and being in Los Angeles is just like me at my like pure happiest when I go back and listen to these. And that's what I think of when I have Bess on. Bess was the best friend Kiki in Terminator. But she also is a singer and was on the new Monkeys and the 20-minute workout. A really fascinating story. And again, a person who always intrigued me because I was wondering kind of what her deal was. You know, what this person's career is fascinating. I'd like to hear more about it. And so, reached out to her, I think on Facebook. And she was just sweet and funny and nice. And that was really fun. Episode 47. This again was in LA. This was with my friend Eric Charles Nielsen. And Eric is a very funny comic and an actor, incredibly unique. Knew him from Boston. He moved to LA and got on Community. Him on Community, I believe his cover was Garrett. And this was airing, and it was bizarre to see a friend I knew from stand-up on a massive network television sitcom. This is when I started seeing my friends be on TV all the time in commercials or, whatever it was. And I was so happy for Eric because he's so funny. Recorded this at his apartment in Hollywood, which was really cool. The next one, again, this surprised me. I've been doing live ones and moderating panels at Northeast Comic Con since this day, December 2014. And I'm doing another one, actually, if you're in the Boston area, the third weekend in March. So I think whatever it is, the 16th or 17th, I'll be doing Northeast Comic Con again in Boxborough. And one of the panels I'm doing is a Growing Pains reunion. So I'll have Tracy Gold and Jeremy Miller, and Julie McCullough, and we'll be talking Growing Pains. It's going to be amazing. Gina Shock is also there from the Go-Go's. Bai Ling's going to be there. There's be some other people. So on the Saturday, at least, I'll be there. So come to that. And since this is more contemporary than I normally record these, I'm also doing 4 more shows with Todd Barry in April. So in Westerly, Rhode Island, Portland, Maine, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, I'll be doing shows with Todd the 26th, 27th, 28th. But you can email me at Kenneth@kenneth@icanread.com or tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or social media. If you want to go to any of those, let me know. I'll give you the details. Anyway, that's Eric. And then this one, Northeast Comic Con. This is with Evan Michelson. And Evan was on the show Oddities, which was a reality show Rachel and I loved. She had a table at Northeast Comic Con. I had a live slot. I had no guest. And I asked Evan because I was a fan of the Oddity Show, and she said yes, and we had a great chat. And again, stayed friends, have a lot of shared interests. She's super cool. Then I did my first Christmas special, December 19th, 2014. I believe this is episode like 56 or something at this point. Again, solo. I have my Excel sheet. Going through Christmas episodes, recommending them for people. Episode 49 is Nikki Luparelli, who I have done a lot of conventions with. Nikki's a comedian and a singer and super talented. She does these really great, elaborate sort of cabaret burlesque shows. Very smart and funny. Nikki's one of my favorite people. Had her on the show. And then episode 50 is Marley Halpern Grazer. Marley, again, one of my favorite people on earth. Marley's an Emerson kid. He moved to LA. He's been running animation shows forever. He worked on all the the DC shorts for Cartoon Network. He had a show called Right Now Kapow. He did a Aquaman show that was really great. We are both huge comic nerds, huge sort of sci-fi nerds. We have a weird tradition that we didn't set out to have, where whenever I'm in LA, we meet up and get Italian food. This happens every time I'm there without planning. It's very weird, but I love it. Although one time I think we went to Chili John's, which is not Italian food, but There's tomatoes in it. But every other time has been Italian food. And I've seen Marley he was doing well then, in 2014. He's just been doing better and better and better as time has gone on. And, I love to see it because he's such a good, talented guy. And I love talking to him. Then I did a New Year's Eve special, same format as the other ones. Here are some New Year's episodes, which is kind of funny to me. A lot of people don't watch New Year's episodes, but there are a bunch, and there's Valentine's episodes. It's sort of Christmas, Halloween, maybe Thanksgiving. But yeah, this is the New Year's special. It's a short one. Episode 51, Christian Finnegan. Didn't know Christian. He was playing Laugh Boston. I shot him an email. We had such a good time. There's so much laughing in this one. This is when I think I kind of started to get a little more comfortable, especially talking to people that I didn't know already, building a rapport. And this is so fun. Like we had such a fun time chatting. Love this episode. That's the whole year. That's 2014. Little bonus because I recorded it in 2014, but it didn't come out till January. Episode 52, Jim Beaver, who I think has been on the show 3 times. I've done live shows with him since. That one he was doing Rhode Island Comic Con. I went to his hotel. We chatted. Fascinating guy. I was, again, a bit starstruck because I'm a huge Supernatural fan. But he couldn't have been nicer and calming, and what an awesome, awesome guy. So then stuff builds more in 2015. If you liked this 10th anniversary show, if this didn't disappoint you, if you were hoping for like a big clip show and musical numbers and I don't know what else, big names. But if you like this, maybe next year I'll do 2015. Like I'll keep doing 10 years in the rears till I catch up to when I started doing these years in review. If you like that, let me know. Let me know how you're doing. If you've been listening to the show from the beginning, or your favorite moments or favorite episodes. I have no intention of stopping. So we're already barreling through year 11 here. I couldn't do the show if you didn't listen. It would be really pathetic. And you guys have stuck around. Like the numbers just continue to grow. Less dramatically, but still they grow. I can't believe it's been 10 years. Bonkers, insane. I've made so many good friends between guests and listeners of the show. I totally skipped over a bunch of episodes, by the way. Oh, Sandra Curry, episode 48. Sandra went to her house. Fascinating woman. Met her husband, who's a director. So good. Sorry to shortchange Sandra. I'm like way too manic today. I had a bunch of coffee. But anyway, happy Valentine's Day, everyone. I love you. It's astounding to me that this has been such a part of my life. This is now like 25% of my life I've been doing this show. Twice as long as college or high school or, any of those things. I've been married for almost 20 years. So that one's double, but this one's pretty close. And I have no intention of stopping anytime soon. Again, cannot thank you guys enough. Reach out to me. Let me know how you're doing, what you like, if you like this, if you didn't like this, whatever it may be. If you think of it, leave a review on whatever app or site you get this from, just to counteract. There's one guy who hates me and gives me 1-star reviews. And my God, do they bother me. Say a little good vibe. I'm not a religious person. Prayer though for Petey. And I'll be here next week. I hope you will too, because it'll be a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor. This is where I normally have a little sting, but I don't have anything funny in this episode.